Hello everyone, welcome to this webinar when we're going to be talking about all things SQE. And I understand that most of you are law students, so hopefully already know some information about the SQE, but we also want to talk to you actually about what happened in the first exam and give you perhaps a little bit more detail now that there has actually been an exam and a set of results, and also the first ever SQE2 exam has been run and sat as well. So welcome to today's webinar, and we're going to take you through some information about the SQE, and then we will have time to answer questions at the end. So if you've got any questions, then do feel free to put them in the chat, in the questions block, and we will come up to them at when we finish talking, and we'll cover all of the questions that you have asked. And if we don't have time to answer all of your questions and there's anything outstanding, we will come back to those after the session and get you a response. So please feel free to ask any of those questions that you want to know. So my name is Tracy Savage. I am the Director of Learning at Barbri, and it's my responsibility to run our SQE1 and our SQE2 prep courses for our students. And I'm joined today by Maddie. Maddie, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi everyone, I'm Maddie and I have just sat both SQE1 in November and SQE2 in April. So I'm fresh off the SQE2 exam route.
Okay, so Maddie is going to hopefully give us some great insights into what it was actually like to do those exams, with some caveats, and I'm just going to say that actually when you actually sit the SQE1 and the SQE2 exams, you do have to sign a confidentiality agreement when you sit those exams, which says that you will not actually discuss the content and what the actual questions were with anybody outside that exam. So I'm just saying that now, so you can't actually ask Maddie what the actual questions were, because she's not allowed to tell you, because she is actually bound by that confidentiality agreement. And one of the things that you do have to do when you apply to be a solicitor is to show that you have suitable character and honesty to be a solicitor. So we don't want Maddie to get any sort of points on her license, should we say, before she's even got one to start with, and affect her suitability. So she can't actually tell us what the questions were, but she can tell us, what the experience was of actually sitting that exam. Okay, so can we move on to the next slide, please? Thank you. So I understand that you already know a little bit about the SQE, but I just want to recap just a few points just to make sure that we're all on the same page before we start getting down to the detail a little bit more. So could we go on to the next slide as well, please? Thank you. So as you know, the SQE is the new route to qualification. The first time we've had a change to qualification for solicitors in England and Wales in almost 30 years. Now, if you are existing law students, then you do have a choice. You can go through the existing method, the legal practice course, or you can choose to use the SQE route. So we're not going to talk at all about the LPC today. I understand that you've already had a webinar about that. So we're only going to be talking about SQE. It is also available for non-law students. So I don't know if there's only law students actually on this webinar, but you can qualify through the SQE as a non-law student, and you don't have to do any conversion course as you used to have to do. You don't have to do a graduate diploma in law. You simply have to do the SQE assessments. And the SQE assessments themselves are in two stages. The SQE1, the first one was in November last year, and the next one is coming up relatively soon, at the end of July this year. And then the SQE2 assessments, the first one of those were in April this year, and the next one is going to be end of October, beginning of November this year. So brand new assessments, brand new way of actually studying. One of the advantages about the SQE compared to the LPC is the flexibility, because you can do your work experience at the same time as you're doing your exams. So it does give you the ability to actually earn whilst you learn, which was much harder to do with the old LPC method. And it's also easier to get that work experience, because there's not the same restrictions on what you actually have to do in a training contract and who can actually offer you that work experience as there is with a training contract. So if we just move on to the next slide, please. So to actually qualify through the SQE route, you have to pass SQE1 and SQE2. You have to get 2 years qualifying work experience. And as I mentioned before, you have to show that you have the suitable character to be a solicitor as well. But for most people, that's pretty easy, so long as they haven't told anybody what actually was in the exam and they've got no criminal convictions or anything. That shouldn't be a problem. And you have to pass SQE1 before you can go on and take SQE2. But apart from that, you can do any of these things in any order. So your qualifying work experience can be after you've done SQE1 and SQE2, it can be between SQE1 and SQE2, it can be before SQE1, or it can be any combination of that, because you can get that qualifying work experience in up to 4 different organisations over a 2-year period. And there can be breaks. It doesn't have to be a 2-year continuous period. It just has to be 2 years in total. So it does give you that little bit more flexibility on how you can actually qualify, rather than the more rigidity of a 1-year legal practice course and then a 2-year training contract. So if we actually just think about the exam then in a little bit more detail. So I don't know if you want to just make our faces a little bit bigger at the moment and make the slide a little bit smaller for the screen. Thank you. So as I'm sure you're aware, the SQE1 is a multiple choice exam. And it's 360 questions over 2 days with a single best answer choice. And that is something that has had a lot of discussion in the legal press, particularly before it was introduced. There was a lot of discussion about multiple choice questions are dumbing down the profession. Everyone's going to be able to pass a multiple choice. You know, it's multiple guess, it's not multiple choice, that sort of thing. And it's going to be really, really easy to pass. But in fact, from the 1st November results that we had, the pass rate was 53% for both FLK1 and FLK2 together. It was a slightly higher pass rate for FLK1, first exam, and I think it was 64% for the pass rate for that, and then 53% I think for the pass rate for FLK2. So passing overall, both of those together, was sort of 53%. So it's not as easy an exam as people actually were suggesting in advance of how easy it was. And I think I just want to hand over to Maddie to say a little bit about that as somebody who's actually been through the exam. So what would you say is actually quite difficult in those days, Maddie?
I think there's a couple of things that really make this a challenging exam. So firstly, just the sheer volume of the content which is assessed. So 360 multiple choice questions is actually a lot of questions. So the way that the exam works is you sit day 1 and then you have a couple of days in between and then you sit day 2. But those days are done in blocks. So you do a 2.5 hour block in the morning, then a break for lunch, then a 2.5 block hour in the afternoon. So you end up with these 2 days of 6 hours of just sitting and doing multiple choice question after multiple choice question after multiple choice question. So that's the first thing that is really, really, really tough about the exam. The second thing that is quite tough is the volume of content which is assessed. So I think there's like 16 subjects assessed in SQE1. Not all of those are assessed at the same time. So there's sort of 8 or 9 subjects assessed on day 1 and 8 or 9 subjects assessed on day 2. But still having to do all of those subjects in one exam, and the questions as they come up are not in segments. So you would have a question on contract and then immediately a question on tort and then immediately a question on business straight after another. They're completely randomized and mixed up. So that is also very, very tough. And then the other thing that's quite difficult is the idea of taking a multiple choice exam. As Tracy said, people seem to think it's this idea of, it's a sort of single best guess or whatever. You've got a 1 in 5 chance of getting every question right. But actually, it's a lot more difficult than that, because the way that the SQE1 exam is run is that each answer is technically right, but one answer is more right than the rest of the answers. And so you can't immediately read a question and then discount at least 3 of the answers because, oh, well, that's obviously incorrect. It's actually a lot more nuanced than that, because you're given a sort of a fact pattern, like a story, and then you're told how, you're asked, how is the law best applied in this situation? And then you get 5 options, and all 5 of those options are technically correct, but one of them is the best one to use in that scenario. So that's a lot different to a sort of, oh, you've got a 1 in 5 chance of getting it right, and you can immediately just count 3 answers because they're obviously wrong, that kind of thing. It's not the same. So it is a very, very different style of assessment to potentially multiple choice exams that you might have done in the past.
And I think it's very different, isn't it, doing that number of topics at the same time, as you were saying, because traditionally most degrees now you would study on a semester basis, or at the most a yearly basis. So you would do perhaps exams at Christmas in a particular topic, say contract or something like that, and then that's it, it's done, isn't it? You don't come back to it. And then you move into the next term, and you would do another question, another topic, say taught or something like that, then be examined and be finished. Whereas with this, it's all of these 16 subjects, and it's the equivalent of what was in a qualifying law degree, the old traditional qualifying law degree, plus the compulsory parts of the LPC, all mingled together, isn't it? So it's an awful lot to actually know. It's a closed book exam, so you can't take any information in with you. And some of the answers, without actually asking you to tell us what the questions were, but some of those answers, it gives you new information in the actual A, B, C, D, and E, doesn't it? And that information can actually be affecting how you actually are, what your actual answer is, and which is that single best answer. So that makes it quite tough, doesn't it?
It does, yeah. I mean, obviously it's not an impossible exam. I passed. 53% of people who took the exam passed, but it's a very different style of exam, and I think it's an entirely different challenge to anything that you might have been assessed in previously during your education. I think I've never ever sat an exam like it. I hope to never ever sit an exam like it again. But yeah, it's an entirely different challenge, and it's a different skill that you have to learn to be able to, one, sit there for 6 hours and answer 180 multiple choice questions a day, and 2, to hold all of that knowledge in your head at once so that you're prepared to answer questions on those topics.
And I think another thing that a lot of students found, I don't know if disturbing is quite the right word, but more of a challenge, which was that you do your test, don't you, in a Pearson View Centre? And that might be the sort of centre that you might have been to in the past, perhaps to do, say, your driving theory test or something like that. And in fact, there's not everybody in the room with you doing that same exam, is there, Maddie? So how does that work?
Well, I was very lucky in that in my test centre, everybody in the test centre was sitting SQE1, but I did hear from other people that they were in a test centre where people were doing a driving exam, people were doing other professional exams, things like accountancy exams, any kind of exam that you have to sit on a computer that is some sort of standardized exam, like a driving exam, like accountancy, like SQE now, all of that kind of stuff. Theoretically, anybody could be in there with you, and their exams could also not last the same amount of time. So they might be coming in at a different point, they might be leaving at a different point, they might be getting their results straight away. So, for your driving theory exam, you find out there and then whether or not you've passed. If you're having a little celebration to yourself, but actually next to you somebody's sat there thinking, oh my gosh, I can't remember my business law and practice knowledge, at the same time, it is a very, very bizarre experience, and again, completely different to anything else that you might have taken in terms of education in the past. Obviously, if you have taken your driving theory test, you maybe have you sort of know vaguely the sort of situation that you're going to be in, but it's very, very different to anything that you might have done at university, even at A-level or GCSE.
And it's such a high stakes exam, isn't it? I mean, obviously your driving theory test, I think at the moment takes quite a long time to book another one because there was big delays with COVID, but it's not as expensive as the SQE1. And I mean, SQE1 only they're only every 6 months. So if you don't pass this exam, then there's a long time to wait before you can resit that exam. So
yeah, not just wait, but also keep all of that knowledge up to, you know, before you go into that exam, you are at the point where you are holding all of this knowledge in your head. It's very, very difficult to sustain that level of knowledge and understanding for a long period of time. It's all right for the 3 days before you're about to sit your exam, but you can't maintain that over 6 months. So yeah, it is a very high stakes exam. You've got the cost of the exam, the fact that it only runs every 6 months, the level of knowledge, the level of preparation that you have to do in order to sit that exam. You're not going to have to do it all again, because hopefully you will retain at least the foundations and stuff, but the level of preparedness that you have before you sit that exam is impossible to maintain for 6 months. So you're going to have to, you know, get yourself back up into the zone again. So yeah, it is a very high stakes exam, and the pressure is definitely on. Everybody in that test center is very, very nervous.
Yeah. And another thing that I think is very different to perhaps exams that you might have sat before is that the exams are written and administered by Kaplan, the multiple choice questions at the Pearson VUE centres, on behalf of the SRA. So that means that if you do a provider course, so if you came to Barbri or ULaw or BPP or whoever to actually do a preparation course for your SQE1, you still have to actually book your SQE1 exam itself, don't you, Maddie? Because your provider can't do it for you. You have to do it. And that is actually quite a stressful experience in itself, isn't it? Would you like to tell us a bit about the booking process?
Yes, the booking process was not very smooth in my personal experience. I do hope that I know that Kaplan and the SRA and Pearson VUE are hoping to streamline this process and improve it for future cohorts. But for me, it was very, very difficult. So first you have to make an SQE account through the SRA's website. Then once booking opens, there is a specific booking period. You have to book your exam, and you have to book both parts of the exam separately. And this sort of opens out into another window. You go through the Kaplan's page, and then you actually end up on a third window, which is the Pearson VUE page. And you have to book your exams by booking a seat at a test centre. But because you have to book both of your exams separately, if you're not very quick and on the ball, it's possible that you might book your first exam in one test center and then find that when you come to book the second part of your exam, that test center is now full. And so you might end up doing your exams in different centers on different days, which I would imagine would be quite disconcerting. You might end up having to travel. So I live in central London, but actually when I came to book my exam originally, all of the test centers that were anywhere near me were fully booked, even though I booked on the very first day of booking. So initially it looked like I was going to have to travel outside of London in order to sit my exam, which is another stress. Luckily, spaces ended up becoming available at a test centre much closer to me, so it ended up working out okay, but that's another level of stress that is completely different. And you don't have your exam places confirmed until you actually pay the fees. So it's all a little bit up in the air. It's quite a difficult process. You have to jump through a lot of hoops in order to book. Similarly for the SQE2, I know we haven't really touched on this, and we're going to go on to this, but sort of whilst we're talking about exam booking and stuff, SQE2 is 5 days long. And again, you have to book all of those days individually at individual test centres. I had massive problems. I was not able to log into my account to actually book because the system crashed. So I ended up having to book over the phone with Kaplan's customer service team. And again, I had the issue of I could book certain days in one centre, but then it was fully booked for other days. So I ended up spending a long time on the phone, sort of chopping and changing, trying to find 3 days to book in the same test center, which was stressful, challenging, not something you really need when you're trying to prep for the exam as well. But yeah, it's definitely something to just be aware of going into this, that obviously regardless of who you do your prep with or whether you even do prep, obviously theoretically you could rock up to the exam and not do any prep. You do have to do that individually by yourself, and it is a process that you actually have to dedicate some time and thought to. It's not as straightforward as just sort of registering for an exam and they'll just put you in the most of it, the closest center to you. You have to individually go out, search for a center, check that they've got space, book it, and then hope, that that centre is available again, and that the system doesn't crash, and that your payment goes through, and that your place is confirmed before someone else nabs it, essentially.
Yes, I know we had a lot of very stressed students when their booking window opened. And in fact, currently for the July exam, we're hearing from students that all of London is at the moment booked, and so students who live in London are going to places like Derby, Portsmouth, that sort of thing, to be able to do their exams. So, you know, obviously we would recommend you book as soon as you possibly can, but it is an issue. They do release sometimes more seats afterwards, but there's no sort of waiting list. So you can't say, oh, I'm interested if a seat opens up in this particular place, can I have it? You've just got to keep checking, haven't you, day after day, to see if any seats have become available where you want to go. So, you know, that's something that's very, very different to sort of university exams, where you would hope that your university would just simply send you the exam timetable and you just rock up to the library or the Great Hall or wherever it is that you're actually having to sit your exams. So that's something else to actually think about. And Maddie did mention SQE2, so shall we move on to there as well? One of the things that you have to consider about SQE2 is that SQE2, you can't sit the exam until you've passed SQE1. And one of the problems is that it does take a long time, doesn't it, Maddie, to get your results back? So you did your exams on the 8th and the 11th of November, didn't you, last year? When did you get those results?
I think it was the end of January, so something like the 25th of something of January, something like that. So it was a considerable length of time, between sitting the exam and getting the results.
And then the SQE2 exam was in April. So that meant that if you wanted to do an SQE2 course, you might have had to actually book onto your SQE2 course before you had your SQE1 results. You can do a prep course, obviously, but it's much better doing a prep course that's prepping you for the exam that you're doing. Again, let's go back to the driving test thing that I said before. You wouldn't do all of your practice in your, in your examiner's car and everything, and then have a 3-month break before you actually got back in a car to do it on your test. So it's something to actually consider, is that sort of flexibility about, what happens if you are booked on a course and you don't pass SQE1, or perhaps you couldn't sit SQE1. Obviously, in November, there were students, particularly overseas students, who couldn't actually sit because of the different COVID rules around the world and that sort of thing. So that is something to think about. What are you going to do? How are you going to do your SQE1 prep? What happens if something goes wrong? Do you immediately have to go onto your SQE2 prep on the particular course you've enrolled on, or can you take a break? How's it actually going to work for you? And SQE2, I think, again, you found that quite a difficult exam, didn't you, Maddie? You said it's 5 days. You have 3 consecutive days doing written exams, don't you, 4 written exams a day. And again, they're very, very condensed together with very small breaks, aren't they? And then you have 2 oral exams. They're usually in a completely different week, sometimes a 2-week break and maybe even a 3-week break, depending on what sitting you actually book into. So what was your take on how the SQE2 days went down then, Maddie?
Yeah, it's very different to SQE1, but still quite challenging, again, in a very, very different way to I've experienced in the past. So like you said, there's 3 consecutive days for writtens and there's 4 exams each day, and they're very condensed. So each day is actually only about 3.5 or 4 hours, and in that time you sit 4 exams back to back. Essentially, there's 1 15-minute break, so you have 2 exams, a 15-minute break, and then 2 more exams, but very, very intense. And those are mixed subjects as well, and mixed skills. So you will do a research exam, then you'll go straight into a writing exam, then you'll have your 15-minute break, then you'll maybe do a case and matter analysis exam, and then you'll do a drafting exam, and then you're done. And that's 4 hours, and that might be on multiple different subjects depending on what day it is. So again, very intense sort of back-to-back assessments in that format, and day 1, day 2, day 3, no sort of gaps between them. And then I sat my oral exams a week after my written exams. So I did Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and then I did the Tuesday, Wednesday of the following week I sat my oral exams. And again, they're back to back. You will do advocacy and interviewing on both days, and in different topics on both days. So you will do your advocacy exam, you'll have a 15-minute break, then you'll do your interviewing exam, or the other way around, depending on how it works. And again, those days are sort of 3.5, 4 hours from start to finish, from when you arrive at the test centre to when you leave the test centre. So very intense, again, back to back, all very condensed into a very short period of time. I mean, on the one hand, it is very good because it means that, after 2 weeks, that's it, you're done. Theoretically at university, my summer exams could drag on over a period of 5 or 6 weeks, depending on when they were scheduled. So in that respect, it's quite positive. You get it all out of the way, at once. But at the time, it's a very, very intense 2 weeks.
Yeah, and as you said, moving from those different subjects is difficult, isn't it? Because, you might have had a 1-hour case and matter analysis on property, for example, and then without even a break, basically you submit it and then the next question comes up, and that might have been a question on probate. So
exactly.
You didn't even have 5 minutes to change your mindset, no. Did you? Going straight from one to the other.
Straight from one to the other, and we call them written exams, but they are sat on a computer again. So the way that it works is your exam will close, like the page will sort of disappear. It'll be like, this exam is now finished. And then the next exam will load automatically again on that same screen. So you literally, you're not even having that period of switching a paper over or, moving from one physical exam paper to another and getting a new exam booklet out. It is literally that page disappears, the next page loads, and you go straight into writing into the next exam, potentially again on different topics. You might go from property to probate or the other way around. You might go from criminal to civil, or the other way around. And yeah, it is very much back to back, and the next screen just loads, and then that's it. It's a little bit different for the advocacy and interviewing because you do get physical materials for that. So any notes that you make and any preparation that you do for that is handwritten as opposed to on a computer. And so it does feel like there's more of a physical break.
And you move from rooms to rooms, aren't you? So
you do, yeah. So there's more of a gap. You also do get the actual break between the 2 exams, whereas for the writtens, you do 2 exams first before you get a break. So the writtens are a little bit more intense in that respect.
And again, a long wait for the results. When are your results due out? So when you did the exams, I'm sure that's engraved in your memory, the dates that you did the exams, and you actually finished quite early because they went on for another 2 weeks after you, didn't they?
Yeah, so I did the written exams, I think it was the 11th till the 13th of April. And then I did my oral exams the week after. But there was then another 2 or 3 weeks of oral exams after mine, because I was booked into the first sittings for the oral exams. And the SRA and Kaplan have said that the results will be coming out on the 25th of August, I think. So bear in mind that I finished these exams mid-April. The results are not coming out until the 25th of August. So that is an awfully long wait to find out how you do in those exams. And obviously, if I don't pass, being able to get exam ready again for October and actually to get a place in the October exams could prove very, very challenging indeed. So it's not an ideal situation at the moment with the release of the results and the exams. Obviously, as I know that they're planning to add more exams throughout the year, so that will become less of a problem in the future, perhaps for when you guys are sitting these exams. It might be less of a problem, but it is still something to consider that it takes an extremely long time to get your results from the exams.
Yeah, and although there are 16 different exams for SQE2, you ultimately end up with 1 mark. They're all distilled down to 1 mark, and it's a pass or fail, isn't it? So if you don't get that pass mark, you can't bank anything that you might have passed advocacy, interviewing, or a particular subject, and you have to resit the whole thing. So that's like, a nightmare scenario, really, isn't it? At least with SQE1, you can pass the first day FLK1 or the second day FLK2 and only have to do half the exam in the future. But with SQE2, it's all or nothing. You either pass it or you fail it. If you fail it, you have to do all 16 exams again at a future sitting. So that's, you know, not wanting to put pressure on you there, Maddie, but that's not a nice thing hanging over your head, is it really?
It's not, no. Again, very high stakes.
Could we just move on to the next slide? So I just wanted to talk a little bit about how Barbri can help you with preparation, and then move on to the next slide again, please. We're just going to talk about SQE1 first, because you've got to do that before you can go to SQE2 anyway. We offer 3 different courses for our students. So for each of the each of the SQE1 exams, in July and in January, we offer those 3 courses. So the first one is a 40-week flexible course, and we aim that really at students who are working full-time, particularly non-law graduates, because that takes about 10 to 12 hours a week preparation. We have a focused 20-week course. So again, part-time, you can do it part-time, takes 20 hours a week if you've got 20 hours a week spare to do, and then an accelerated course, which is a full-time course, which really is best for very, very recent law graduates, because that is very, very intense. It's effectively the same course. We cover exactly the same material. It's just the time that you actually have to spend on that. And our 40-week course is the one that takes the least. It takes the same amount of time over the 40 weeks, but the least amount of time week by week as you're working. And we say that that's also suitable for non-law graduates. So people can come on our course without having done a conversion course. So, you know, if you're a non-lawyer, you could come straight on that course. And in fact, Maddie, that's your case, isn't it? So could you just tell us what it was like for you actually studying? You were working full time, you did a non-law degree, you had no legal background, did you, when you came on this course? So how did you find it?
Yeah, so my degree is in French and linguistics. So as Tracy said, I have absolutely no background in law. I've never worked in the law. The job that I'm working in at the moment is a non-legal role. I had no previous experience with law at all. And I came on the course, and obviously I was very apprehensive at the beginning, because I was a little bit concerned that I was going to be on the back foot a little bit, not having any background at all in law. But the way that the materials are set out are to make sure that everybody ends up being on the same page. So because, you know, some people are stronger at one area of law than another. Even if you've done a law degree, I'm sure that there's topics that you cover in first year that you're not going to really remember very well by the time you've finished your degree. So the way that the materials are set out basically brings everybody up to speed. Everybody is on the same page. I imagine if it's something that you have studied before, then you could probably breeze through that a little bit quicker. But, you know, maybe there's other areas that, again, you studied in first year and you can't remember, or wasn't something that you covered on your law degree, that kind of thing. The way that they're all set out means that they can take somebody who has absolutely zero knowledge of the law to not just pass, but I actually got... in the second exam, I actually ended up in the first quintile of people's results for the second exam. So the course clearly works, because they managed to take the sort of garden gnome of lawyers and get them to not just pass the exam, but to pass it really well. So yeah, it's definitely a trust the process program though.
And did you find that you could do it as well? I mean, you're a non-lawyer, but also you were doing a full-time job as well, weren't you? And I believe you're pretty busy. You had some quite big pinch points in your job while you were studying.
I did. Yeah. So the great thing about the flexible course, the 40-week course, was that if, for example, I had 2 weeks at work where I was working late, I was having to put in a lot of hours, I was exhausted at the end, was that I could just take 2 weeks off studying and then just bulk up the weeks before and after, because all of the materials are available on demand. There's nothing that you have to do at a certain specific time. So I was able to fit in my study as and when I had the time available. I was quite lucky when I first started that we were still in sort of a big COVID lockdown. I didn't have, a massive social life going on, because obviously everybody was just at home, not really doing anything. So it was quite easy for me to get my work in. But obviously, as things started to open up last summer, it became a little bit more difficult trying to juggle that. So having a course that was available completely flexibly and on demand meant that I, could spend one evening, getting a couple of hours in. Maybe I had a spare half hour for a lunch break and I fit in a lecture or a set of multiple choice questions, or, maybe I had a few hours on a weekend where I could sit and do a longer reading, that kind of thing. the flexibility of the course means that you can fit your study in around your life, as opposed to having to plan your life around your study, which is slightly depressing, especially when, you know, you've just been cooped up for 2 years and you want to go out with your friends every now and again. So yeah, I really recommend it as a part-time course. It's definitely doable if you're working full-time. Obviously dependent on what your commitments are, can dictate the course that is right for you.
Yeah, and I would say as a learning coach, it's one of the people who are appointed to support our students through the course. All of our students will get an individual nominated learning coach that they can make appointments with to help with their study and so on. I think the most important thing, I would say, if you're coming onto one of our courses, is to actually sit down and think, you know, what time do I actually have? And therefore, what is the best course for me? Because students are always, you know, so desperate to, I know I want to do it as soon as possible. I want to be doing this course at the same time as I'm doing that course. And yeah, I can clear them all off and great. And that's fantastic if it works. But if it doesn't, if you actually end up failing one of your SQE exams, that will push you much further back than it would have been to go, you know what, actually, looking at that time, I'm not going to get everything done on that 20-week course. For the next exam, I'm better doing the 40-week course for the exam after that, because you know, your generation, I mean, you know, you're going to be working till you're about 85, aren't you, I think, before you're going to end up with a pension or anything like that. So you've got plenty of time to be working in the law. Seriously, a few months at the beginning of your working life is not going to make that much difference to the overall amount of time that you're going to be spending working and the sort of quality of your life overall. So my big advice would be to actually sit down. If you're thinking, oh, should I do the 40-week course or the 20-week course? Actually sit down and think, okay, so what's going to be going on in my life at that particular point? You know, am I going to be working? What are my contractual hours? And then what are my expected hours? That might be slightly different than your contracted hours, mightn't it? Is it likely that you're going to end up doing any extra overtime or be called in at any extra time to do work, that sort of stuff? What else have you got going on in your life? You know, how many times do you, I don't know, go to the gym to train or something like that? Do you have regular appointments that you're doing, that type of thing? And actually look over the next month and think, okay, so if I was doing this course for the next month, then what spare capacity would I have? Do I have 2 hours a day to study? Do I only have 1 hour a day to study? How's it actually going to work? And make sure that you can make that proper commitment to the course that you actually come, because I would say that there is a big link between finishing the course and success on the exam as well. So Maddie, you did complete the course, didn't you? You did do all of the tasks and you did well in the exam. So you know, you want to make sure that you're paying money for your course to your provider. You're also paying to sit that exam. The current fees is £1,558. It's about to go up for SQE1 to £1,622 for the exam fee. SQE2 is currently £2,422 for the exam fee and is going up to £2,493. I think, I don't know why they're not nice round numbers, but you know, it's going up. So that's a lot of money that you're spending. You want to make sure that you're giving yourself that best chance possible to actually, you know, give your best opportunity to do your best in that actual exam. So I think that's probably most of the things that we actually wanted to say. If you just want to flip over onto the last slide now. So I think what we'll do now is deal with the questions that we've got that have come up. So obviously, anybody else put a question into that question chat, and I'll just start going through those. I don't know if I can order it to the ones that have had the most upvotes. So I think I can. Look at me being all technically clever here. So the one that's had the most, and I don't know also if you, I'm going to read out the question just in case you, I don't know if you can actually see them or on the recording. So the first question that we've got is, I'm currently a non-law undergraduate student, will graduate in June next year. Would you recommend doing a master's degree before committing to prepare for the SQE exams, or just start the SQE exams prep straightforward? I don't know. I think it really depends on where you want to be going with your life, and you know, what the opportunities are for you to actually get on to the master's course. I don't know whether or not there's any restrictions in that, or any, you know, competition for getting on to the master's course. I mean, I would say it would be easy for you to get onto an SQE preparation course, so it's unlikely that you're going to have, you know, sort of competition in places for that, if you see what I mean. So if it's harder for you to get a place on a particular master's, depending on what course it is that you're doing, if there's a lot of competition for that, then if you manage to get a place for next year, you might choose to do that instead of SQE1 and postpone SQE1. You can also do it as some combination around it. So you know, you could do SQE1 and then do your master's and then do SQE2 or something like that as well. It is very, very flexible, isn't it, Maddie? And also you've got your qualifying work experience, obviously, to fit in around that. So you might want to try and get some qualifying work experience before you even start SQE1. Now, Maddie, you haven't, have you? You've taken the approach that you're going to do SQE1, SQE2, and then move into your qualifying work experience. That's correct, isn't it?
Yeah. And I would also say, you know, in terms of recommendations, just think about what you want. So I knew that I didn't want to do another year at uni. I didn't want to get a master's degree. I wasn't really that fussed about it. But if you're somebody who's like, actually, I want to come out of this with not just qualifying as a solicitor, but actually I also want to come out with a master's degree, then that is something that you might want to pursue. If you want to get through the qualification process as quickly, efficiently, and, you know, inexpensively as possible, I don't think that you should bother, because, you know, as I said, I've not done any, you know, I'm a non-law, and I was a non-law undergraduate. Obviously now I'm a non-law graduate. I didn't do a master's. I didn't do anything. I just came straight into SQE prep, and, you know, I've passed SQE1 and fingers crossed for SQE2. So it's not necessary, but if it's something that you want, then obviously, you know, that you just have to really consider your personal circumstances in that situation, and what it is that you want to get out of your qualification journey.
And where you want to be long term as well. So, you know, if you're thinking that you do actually want to qualify and become a solicitor, then is that master's working towards it? Is that in a field of law that you're hoping to actually specialise in or something? Or is it something completely different? And that's fine. But if it's something completely different, if it's not actually in a legal topic, if it's something else that you're interested in or something, then maybe you might want to pursue that first, because it might be that there might be other careers that you might be then more interested in moving into away from a law career, for example. So as Maddie says, you know, it's what's your long-term goal, I think, is going to be important within that. Okay. So what's the next one? So the next one that I've got is, if you do not choose to take the SQE, how can you qualify as a solicitor or still work in the legal field? Okay, so first of all, if you're already, if you started a qualifying law degree before the end of 2021, so by last September, then you have the choice. There is a set of transitional rules which say that you can either do the SQE or you can use the old LPC route into the profession. So that means that you could do your legal practice course and then find a training contract and do 2 years as a training contract and qualify as a solicitor that way. That is harder, or could be harder, just because there is a limited number of training contracts available. So one of the things that the SRA was trying to do when they brought in the SQE route was to make it easier for people to qualify and to stop that bottleneck of people who are good lawyers not being able to get a training contract, and in particular enabling you to get qualifying work experience in firms and in organizations that would not have been able to offer a training contract in the past. So that's things like in-house solicitors, that sort of thing. In the past, it was hard for them to offer training contracts because they couldn't offer it in enough different subjects, in both a litigious and a non-litigious seat. There's no requirement for that for QWE. And also in a lot of more sort of social justice pathways into the law, both because those firms specialised in one particular area, so again couldn't offer the three different training seats, but also financially they find it very difficult to offer training contracts. But those types of firms will be able to offer qualifying work experience. So it might be easier to get qualifying work experience in those fields than it was to get a training contract. So your choice is basically do the SQE, qualifying work experience, qualify that way, or to do the LPC and qualify that way. Otherwise, because what's going to happen is everyone is going to have to do the SQE1 and the SQE2 route in unless they're exempt in any way. So there might be other fields that you could be exempt, but at the moment, the actual qualified exemptions are relatively limited. You can look on the SRA's website and look as if you go into already a qualified lawyer. So if you go to the SRA's website and look at becoming a solicitor, and then there's different things as like law graduates, non-law graduates, and then qualified lawyers. If you click on that there's exemptions there that are available, and if you look there to see whether you would come within one of those exemptions. But at the moment there's very few of those overall exemptions, and for example, barristers are not exempt, Scottish solicitors are not exempt, so Silex lawyers are not exempt unless they have practicing rights, and even then they're not exempt from the full SQE1 and SQE2. So the whole point is that everybody is going to have to come through the SQE route unless they can get an exemption from either SQE1 and or SQE2. Okay. And then the next question, is it worth LPC grads doing SQE2? Now, we do have quite a lot of LPC grads who came onto our SQE2 prep course that we've just run for the exams that Maddie was just talking about in April. And it really depends on whether or not you've been able to be successful in getting a training contract. So if you can get a training contract, then you'll do your LPC and the training contract. If you can't get a training contract, then with the LPC, you can do, you're exempt from SQE1, so you can do SQE2 and then do qualifying work experience. And particularly for people who've had an LPC and have been working as paralegals for a number of months or years, that paralegaling work qualifies as qualifying work experience. And so therefore they're doing their SQE2 because it's easier for them to qualify using that qualifying work experience than it is to try and find a training contract. So again, it depends on, you know, whether you're lucky enough to get a training contract, and also whether or not, you know, as I said, you're looking for more sort of corporate style work. There's more training contracts in corporate work than there is in, as I say, social justice in particular, that type of work. Okay. I've been asked as well, what's the recommended time commitment? So I'm assuming you're thinking that for doing a preparation course, and I think that's the slide that we had a moment ago. I don't know if we can just flip back to that. So it depends on which course you're doing. So with our flexible course, we say that it's 10 to 12 hours a week. And Maddie, would you agree? You did that course?
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. Obviously, you put more hours in towards the end of your course because you're, you know, getting the revision in and you're really hitting the books and whatever before the exam. But across the time period, I would say that yes, that is a very accurate sort of time commitment per week to spend on the course.
Can you just talk through the other two?
Yeah, sure. So obviously, if you go into the focused course, it's probably something more like 20 hours a week. So I assume that's why it's obviously better for either, you know, maybe if you're not working and you didn't do a law degree, you've definitely got 20 hours a week to dedicate to it. But if you are working and do have a law degree, then you could, you know, probably fit that in on top because you might get through the work a little bit quicker. As I said, it does get a little bit more intense towards the exam, depending on your own personal revision style. Obviously, if you are able to just, you know, keep committing that 10 hours a week and not do any revision on top of that, then that's great. But yeah, that's sort of the level. I think the Barbri course is like maybe 350 or 360 hours of prep in total, somewhere around that. So that is obviously basically split over those 3 course lengths. And so I sort of did roughly 360 hours of prep for SQE1, and it was about 100 hours of prep for SQE2, not including my own revision on top of that leading into the exam.
Thank you, Maddie, for stepping in for there. I think as well, I think this links to some of the questions that we've had, is whether or not one of the advantages I would say about doing SQE is that, remember I said that you can do the qualifying work experience around your SQE1. And I think, and this goes to an earlier question about how else could you work in the law even if you're not going to be a solicitor. So you could be a paralegal. And that means that you're actually working in the law. You're doing a lot of the jobs that sort of associate solicitor, more newly qualified solicitor would do. But it gives you the opportunity to try different areas of law, because remember, you can get your qualifying work experience in up to 4 different areas. So that enables you to try, because I think, you know, when you're doing a law degree, a lot of the areas that you think are very interesting might not actually be interesting in practice. So qualifying work experiences are sort of almost try before you buy, if you know what I mean. So you could think, oh, I really want to be a litigator. I think that sounds really exciting, that sort of stuff. And get a paralegal job in litigation and discover that you're just preparing endless documents or bundles or something like that, and you never go anywhere near court. I don't know. I'm not a litigator, so that might be being dismissive of what you do in the litigation department there. Probably am. Or you might think that, you know, probate law sounds incredibly boring, but when you actually get into practice, you might find that it's really interesting. So it enables you to do your qualifying work experience and move around to different firms, different organisations, to find the area that you actually are interested in, and that will, you know, help you to know where you want to be as a newly qualified solicitor, as well as I think one of the problems that people would have, there was such a competition to get a training contract. People would fall over themselves to get a training contract. They wouldn't really think where it was they were being offered that job sometimes. And so because they'd got a training contract and that was the holy grail of, you know, qualification, they'd be like, great, I'm going to do that. And they'd go to a firm and then discover that actually it was an area of law that they didn't like, or a subject that they weren't interested in, or something like that. But then they're trapped. Do you see what I mean? So it gives you that little bit ability to do different things and see how it actually works for you, and so on. So that's something that you could actually consider. Somebody's asked me, why are LPC grads not exempt from SQE2? The skills assessments are basically the same. And as you can imagine, a lot of expense and time on the LPC. That's something you're going to have to take up with the SRA. Okay. Sorry, not my bad there. And I think the reason would be that the SRA are saying one of the other things that they want to do with the SQE was to have a central exam. You know, everybody sits the same exam. So both law firms and also clients know that anyone who's a solicitor is at that basic level standard. Whereas with LPC, obviously, different providers set their own exams. So there's that. Whether or not it's true or not, there's that perception that it might have been easier to pass your LPC at one institution rather than another. In the same way as there is, again, whether it's true or not for universities, isn't there? You know, oh, a degree from X is better than a degree from Y. Is that true or not? Everyone sitting that same exam means that there's no discussion about that anymore. Okay. I'm just clicking through. Does working in the legal tech space meet the QWE requirements? So for QWE, you have to be exposed to at least 2 of the competencies for a newly qualified solicitor. You have to be providing legal services. So that would be the thing within the legal tech space, is whether or not you're providing legal services or not. But you can look at the SRA's website and see whether or not you're doing those competencies. And the other thing is it does have to be signed off by a solicitor who's on the roll. You need to make sure that you've got somebody who can actually sign you off for your QWE. All of the details are on the SRA's website. So for the costs for the prep courses, basically you pay the cost to your provider to do a prep course. You pay the cost directly to Kaplan when you enroll on the exams. Our prep courses are for SQE1. The fees for our prep course, tell me if I'm wrong, are £2,999 for SQE1. And If you're an alumni of us, so if you've done SQE1 with us, then the course for SQE2 currently is £2,999 as well. If you haven't done SQE1 with us, it will be £3,499. We do have some scholarships available. Some of them are merit-based, some of them are means-based, means test-based. Look on our website. We have details of our scholarships that are available. Okay. I'm just looking through. Maddie, is there anything that I've missed that's higher voted?
No, but just wanted to sort of cover one of the top ones at the moment about costs. Obviously, if you are working for a firm who have decided to sponsor you through SQE, they will pay either just your exam fees or your exam fees and your prep course fees for you. And you also might not have a choice of where you do your prep, because your sponsored firm might decide where you want to sit where they want you to do your SQE prep. But you can always self-study and self-fund. So I have done that for mine. So I took the Barbri course, and I'm not sponsored by any firm. Like I said, I haven't begun my QWE yet or anything like that. So it just depends. It depends on the firm. It depends on the individual. There might be firms who will pay for your exams but not for your prep. There might be firms that pay for both. There might be firms that say, yes, we'll pay for both, but you have to do your prep, because we have an agreement with X provider, you have to do your prep with this particular provider. So it really just depends on that. And if you are working for a firm, I would say speak to them about it.
Yeah, and also if you are sponsored by a firm, they might say, no, you're doing the LPC. Or you're doing it.
Yeah, exactly. There was a question that came in about the exam. Oh, here it is. Do wrong answers reduce the score, or are only the right answers counted? Only right answers are counted on the exam. So you don't get down marked for wrong answers. You only get points for answers that you score correctly. So yeah, that's how it works. And again, on SQE2, it's a little bit different because it's a skills-based exam, but you aren't necessarily, if you say something right and say something wrong, they don't necessarily discount each other in terms of points. Although again, it is marked a little bit differently on SQE2, because obviously if you advise a client wrongly, then that might go against you, but you're not going to end up getting negative marks, if that makes sense, which you'll then have to redeem by getting positive marks. It's you only get marks for what you put right.
Yeah, and with SQE2, 50% of the marks are on the skills, and 50% of the marks are on the actual legal content. So you can get very good marks on the skills, and that means you don't have to be quite as good at the law. So which is the best way to aim for, I would say. Okay. And then what other questions have we got? You can, obviously, you could do the LPC and then go on to the SQE, because as I've said, if you do the LPC, you're exempt from SQE1. You just have to do SQE2. So that is an opportunity. If you're, we've had a specific question for you, Maddie. Did you start your preparation for SQE2 before you received your SQE1 results?
Yes, I did, because the SQE2 Barbri prep course started about 3 weeks before I got my results. So I just kind of had to trust in the process and hope. I enrolled on SQE2 before I got my results from SQE1. Obviously, I was successful, so then I just carried on the course. But I know that some people chose to wait and therefore had to catch up sort of 3 weeks worth of work, because they'd waited to see whether or not they had passed SQE1 before they decided to start their SQE2 prep. It's a personal decision, I guess. I was quite glad that I had done it, obviously, because I passed, but also because I think it would have been tough working full time trying to catch up on 3 weeks worth of work, because the SQE2 prep course is a little bit less flexible than SQE1 in that you have to kind of keep up with it because it takes place over such a short period of time.
And one of the things that you've got to bear in mind is sometimes you can't go straight from SQE1 to SQE2 because, for example, the students who are doing the July SQE1 exams this year, the SRA have told them that their results will not be out in time for them to actually book on to the SQE2 exam in October. So they will have to wait until next April to do the next exam. So if we've missed any of those questions, because I don't think I quite got through all of them, so if we've missed any of those questions, then the questions are going to be sent over to us afterwards and we'll be able to reply to them later. So I apologise if I haven't covered everything that we've been asked. Thank you very much for being so engaged and raising so many questions of us. I hope that you found this webinar helpful today, and thank you so much everyone for joining us. It's 3 o'clock now, so this is the end of the webinar. Thank you so much.
Thank you.